about 5 years since I did a video on hybrid mana. I had not banged that drum in quite some time, and I've let sleeping dogs lie. For the record, I've always been pro changing how hybrid mana works in Commander. I'll unpack exactly how that is in just a moment. The reason I'm opening the video like this is to explain just how long I've been on this train. It is such a pervasive thing that I spoke about at one time or another that Sheldon Menery himself used to explicitly ask me to not mention it when we hung out. That's right, humble brag, I'm part of the wider Magic ecosystem of creators, and thus I've hung out with most members of the previous and some members of the existing new CAG? Commander, whatever the fuck the systems are called, I don't even know. And thus I've been in the room when multiple members of those committees have joked about how they're never changing hybrid mana ever. And I've had to put my hand up and be like, by the way guys, I'm not on board with this joke. I actually am, I'm the problem. So it's really weird to come to the situation now where they've made massive sweeping changes. I say massive sweeping changes, they haven't. They've made minor changes to the bracket system and everyone's treated like major changes because that helps the news day go bigger. You can make a video with a shocked thumbnail, kind of the kind of things that I would make. I was saying it's massive when it's just not that massive. This is the new bracket system. It's the old bracket system with some extra language added that makes it much clearer. It's a lot of homework to do. People like myself should read it so we can disseminate it down, yada, yada, yada. I just don't really care enough because the bracket system is mildly useful at best. I don't hate it, I just don't want to talk about it. But at the end of the video where Gavin explained all of these changes on his channel, Good Morning Magic, he mentioned how they're looking at hybrid mana. Hybrid mana is where you get a mana symbol that has two colors in it. In this case, white and blue. In Magic, that mana can be spent using white or using blue to spend and use that card, to cast it and put it onto the stack. Of course, the spell itself is multicolored. It is both, in this case with Dovescape, blue and white, and it's a permanent, so it's blue and white when it's in play as well. But the design intention behind hybrid mana is to allow the card to function as either or in terms of where it can be played. This, of course, is different in Commander. In Commander, as part of the color identity rules that are specific directly to Commander and no other part of Magic, it functions completely different to every other format in Magic, barring perhaps Brawl being an offshoot and baby of Commander itself. But in Commander, Dovescape is of the blue-white color identity because all pips on it are counted towards its colors, and thus can only be played in a deck where blue or white is the part of the color identity. So for example, this Commander here is blue and white, and thus can play Dovescape, whilst this Commander here is white and cannot play Dovescape under the current rules of Magic. The argument people have made in the past, including Mark Rosewater, one of their lead designers of Magic, is that the either-or intention of the design means that we should probably adjust the color identity rules in Commander to allow us to play hybrid cards in decks that only share one of the colors. Waves of Aggression is a good example of this for a card that is a topical talking point I'll get to more in a moment. It's both red and white. It's basically an extra combat step spell with retrace, and thus it's the only instance of this existing in white as an extra combat step thing. White doesn't tend to get this. I'll come more to talking about the color pie breaks that exist few and far between, Waves of Aggression being one of them. But under the proposed changes by people like myself and Mark Rosewater, Waves of Aggression will be playable in a mono white deck and a mono red deck, as well as any deck that has those colors in their color identity. For example, Rafik of the Many, a green, white and blue deck, could now have Waves of Aggression, a white extra turn spell. I think this will open up interesting spaces for people to play with cards that they love. For example, Kitchen Finks and Murder's Redcaps are two of my favorite cards of all time, and I often find it very restricted where I can actually play them in Commander because of their dual color identity that's going on. And it is a minor, and I mean this, a minor adjustment to the current color identity rules in order to adjust them to allow hybrid mana to function how it's meant to function. And I think that's a good thing overall. It's important to note at this point that hybrid mana has been described by the designers of Magic to be a thing that tries to do things that each color can do. So if you have a hybrid blue-white card, for example, it will do something that both blue and white could do individually, but there is a crossover between. Now, truth be told, this doesn't always quite work. The example of Waves of Aggression is one of the most obvious examples where that's not quite true. And there's plenty of hybrid cards that do things that are individual to their colors, like Azorius Guildmage, which was a hybridized casting cost to make it cheaper and easier, easier to cast in limited, but it had a white activated ability and a blue activated ability that were very distinctly part of their own color identities. That is denoted by the explicit use of the colored pips in their activation costs, and thus something like Azorius Guildmage, for example, or Deathrite Shaman being one of the really topical ones, would only be playable in decks where, in the case of Azorius Guildmage, there's a blue and a white color pip in the color identity of the commander, and there's a black and a green color pip in the color identity of the Commander for Deathbite Shaman. I think allowing people to play with more toys whilst keeping the format's identity pretty much the same, if not minorly adjusted. I mean minor, I'm going to keep saying that because I don't think this is a huge adjustment. I'll talk more about that as we go on. I think that's nothing but a good thing. In order to do that, I'm going to engage with quite a few of the counter arguments and discuss why I don't think they really hold much merit and why I have not heard a single argument that really even comes close to convincing me that this isn't just a good holistic change. All that and more in today's video. If you're looking to buy a single or sealed product like a copy of Waves Aggression, for example, you can do so in North America from CoolStuffInc.com. Use the code Kenobi at checkout to get 5% off your order and help support the show. And MagicMadhouse.co.uk is your source for all single sealed products, as well as other nerdy needs like board games and Warhammer in Europe. Find a link in the description below. Check them out, help support the show. Let's look at some of the counter arguments that I've seen on the internet over the last 2 days. Some of them directly at me. The first of which is, it's to sell Lorwyn Eclipsed. Hybrid Mana was originally a Ravnica thing that then came back for its second time round in Shadowmoor, and then has consistently been used across a wide range of Magic products up until literally the Turtles cards that got previewed for a set that's coming out next year. Hybrid Mana is a commonly used tool. Importantly though, it is linked to some planes more directly. Ravnica, for example, allowing them to express guild identities as like hybrid middle grounds between two colors, and in Shadowmoor where they do a similar thing with some of the creature types. And thus, as we return to Lorwyn Eclipse next year in January, we are going to have more hybridized mana costs and similar showing up on the cards. This means some people are seeing a grand conspiracy where the only reason we're looking at hybrid mana now is to sell packs with Lorwyn Eclipsed, missing the fact that the set coming out next, which is Avatar and TMNT after Lorwyn and other sets currently in production and being previewed, like Avatar, have hybrid mana in them. The argument that it's just to sell Lorwyn packs doesn't make sense. If anything, it's just to sell packs. That said, I don't really believe that's true either. I think as we go back to a plane that does focus on Lorwyn, and we see the stuff being used in sets like Avatar, for example, and they are reassessing just how they deal with Commander in general, with new bracket systems, game changes, and looked at the ban list, for example, after a decade and a half of borderline, almost always no changes, I think there is natural points in time when to look at existing status quo and see if it needs to be adjusted. And thus, as we go back to a plane where hybrid mana is part of its original identity, at least, it's going to be in some of the callbacks and throwbacks to that nostalgia, I think it's a good spot, a natural place, a logical place to have that conversation, to have that bit of retrospection. It is not the grand conspiracy that you think it is. I think that's a very almost childish way of looking at it. I'm trying not to be insulting to the people that don't agree with me or on the other side of the fence, but I can't help but think the constant need to think everything is a conspiracy from Wizards of the Coast is not helpful to any conversation besides fuck WotC, which is sometimes it's really like therapeutic to say that when their prices are absurd and they're fucking things up. When it comes to the discussion of hybrid mana and how it works in Commander, I don't think a fuck WotC sentiment helps anything. Won't somebody think of the new players? A conversation piece that I often see around hybrid mana changes is that it would make it confusing for new players, which I think is quite dishonest. I've spoken to many a new player over the years, played with new players, and they have gone to include hybrid cards in their decks as a sort of automatic reaction to reading or being told the base rules of Commander. If anything, hybrid cards being able to be used, for example, Reese the Redeemed in a mono green deck. I'm not saying playing Reese with a green deck, I'm saying playing a different green Commander like this one and having Reese in the 99. That feels like a natural extension of the current rules of Commander. It is often having to explain to new players that you can't do that is where the confusion begins. Anecdotally, reading a Reddit thread about this announcement on this conversation topic, one of the top comments was this one. My first thought reading this was, isn't that already how it is? I guess this is how I found out it's not. This is someone who's enfranchised enough to go on a fucking subreddit for Magic, and they don't even know, because it's not this clear, intuitive, hard set thing. It's actually a confusing quirk of the color identity rules versus how hybrid mana works literally everywhere else. Beyond that, the game is fucking infinitely complex as it is. I do agree that changing things to add more complexity, although I'd argue that this is making things more intuitive and therefore less complex, but let's just say it is making it more complex. I think it's such a small amount laid on top of an already vastly complicated game that we're moving the dial such a small amount that it just doesn't fucking matter. Does that small movement of the dial, mere millimeters, does that equate to a positive change elsewhere where people get to play with cards in the way that they're intended and have fun with those cards? I think the positive outweighs that negative. There's also the sentiment that like people are just fucking stupid beyond new players. People can't understand the difference between attacking and attacks. This is not a positive change, said one user on Twitter, responding to some joke that I threw out there and turned the fucking account off. I don't even know why I went back to read the comments. It was way worse than Blue Sky. People not understanding the base amount of Magic does not mean that Magic should not be adjusted, status quo should not be reflected upon, or we shouldn't look to improve things. That's just not how that works. People can be confused about shit. People at my local store didn't know a stack existed until I explained it to them. One of my local stores, not my localist store. If you're watching from the Andover area, it wasn't collectibles. But just because I didn't know the stack existed doesn't mean that certain rules cannot change to improve the experience elsewhere or to allow new things to happen. That logic does not make sense. Those two things do not match up. And also, people aren't fucking stupid. Magic is hard, and that's completely fair. The other bit that comes up about new players not understanding things is that the cards in play are colors that their deck shouldn't be able to make, and thus it's confusing. Cold-Eyed Selkie is a card that I've played in many a command deck over the years. Putting equipment on it, island walking through people, and drawing many cards is extremely fun. I fucking love this card. Of course, I've only played it in blue-green or primarily Bant decks over the years because of how its color pairings work out. I would love to be able to play this in blue-white decks or green-red decks, for example, but I just can't currently. But if I could, of course, let's say I play this in a mono-green deck. Let's go back to that green commander from earlier. We're playing Cold-Eyed Selkie in there, it comes into play, and now it's a blue card, so it dies to red elemental blast. People point to this as a gotcha for surely it's a blue card, and yes, it is a blue card. It's a blue card within a part of the game called Hybrid Mana that is very specifically its own thing, describing how things move between the two colors, and thus they can be both simultaneously useful and utilized as one color and the other, even if when in play they are both colors simultaneously. In all other formats of Magic, Cold-Eyed Selkie is usable in mono blue and mono green decks. The arbitrary cutoff for it in Commander is just a little bit strange, something we don't need to religiously hold to simply because it dies to an REB. And further to that, I just want to point out that having cards that like target other colors being effective against a mono green deck, so like an REB hitting a card in a mono green deck, is not that new or frustrating or confusing to understand. There are literally 100 examples like Mage's Attendant where a card creates a token that's outside of color identity. My normal go-to is Batterskull, a colorless card that creates a black germ that can be played in all commander decks. But Mage's Attendant in specific is a 3-mana 3/2 that creates a blue token, which then interacts with things that interact with blue permanents. That's not confusing, that's not difficult to register, it's just an interesting quirk of something that comes up in Magic. If anything, that allows to creative play. I'll come back to that more in a moment. But people aren't too fucking stupid to understand that a card might just be blue when it's in play, even though it's a card with a mana cost that can be played with green mana, because it is a green tool that happens to end up being blue. Much in the same way that the blue token that comes out of Mage's Attendant comes out of a white tool. Further to that, we have the slippery slope argument, that this will just open the door to a lot of fucking nonsense. The obvious one and most common one is the comparison to Birthing Pod and its ilk with Phyrexian Mana, and I understand the comparison. The reason people make this comparison is that if we allow Phyrexian Mana to function like it does in other formats, like we're asking for Hybrid Mana, the Phyrexian Mana cards can be played in any deck just for life instead of the color. That's already a distinction that I think is very valid though. The hybrid cards just simply go into the color that is part of them already, where Birthing Pod can go into literally any deck. Any of the 5 colors of deck in Magic and colorless can now play Birthing Pod if we were to open that door. And the vast majority of people asking for Hybrid Mana aren't asking for Phyrexian Mana. It's very rare to find someone who is wanting both. I know that sounds anecdotal in the point that I'm making, but it's fucking true. I rarely come across people who want both. They normally just want to completely remove all identity from Commander itself, and that's not something I or many people are looking for. Beyond that, Phyrexian Mana is also unique in the fact that it's a fucking mistake. Hybrid Mana is a design tool utilized commonly and consistently across Magic still to this day to show things sliding across the color pie and being 2 colors at once. Phyrexian Mana is not that. Phyrexian Mana is breaking the color pie explicitly to a rather negative effect. Cards like Birthing Pod and Mental Misstep and Gitaxian Probe have all been banned in multiple formats because of the problems that they cause. I don't think anyone is asking for a problem to be unleashed explicitly onto Commander beyond people who are a little bit fucking mad, if I'm honest. No fucking Manamorphose even, some of the best examples I can come to in a moment about power level, even the best versions of this come close to breaking open the game in the same way that Phyrexian Mana does. And that slippery slope continues, because at the bottom we have people saying, well, why not just throw out color identity entirely? Why don't you go play a different format? And I think those people are having an emotional reaction and an overreaction, if I'm honest, and I don't think that's very helpful, but I will try to engage with it and give a point to why I feel that that's not useful. The Commander format, people describe that the color identity identity rules are a load-bearing pillar of the format. I don't think that's necessarily true. I do think having to build within the confines of a commander and having access to that commander to sort of like fine-tune or act like a prism to focus your deck build is absolutely something that defines the format and brings people towards it, but color identity is kind of a byproduct of that, if you will. I'm not saying we remove all of color identity. No one really is, except for the people who are using it as a gotcha to fight against the idea of hybrid mana. But I do think the success of Commander, as a sort of a little aside here, is because of the multiplayer nature, the 100 card singleton varied nature, the the philosophy of just not giving a fuck and it not being about winning. Those things combine to create a form of Magic that absolutely resonates as a social game. Add to all of that the fact that you can have a almost like a personality built around the characters that you're picking, the characters that you main, talking to other people about their enthusiastic love of a certain commander, and that focusing your game plan in a way that other formats don't do by making you pick a thing that exists in an extra zone beyond your hand. I think all of those things do combine to make Commander very special, and hence why it's so fucking successful. I think color identity is like a sub-clause within 0.5 that is a happy byproduct in many ways. So when we do come to reassess things, I do think color identity should be looked at as part of that reassessment. But again, we aren't looking to remove it or completely fundamentally change it. We are looking to address a small thing that changes a corner case weirdness with hybrid mana to make it work like it does in other formats, whilst also bringing very minimal problems, as I'm trying to illustrate in this video. And by minimal, I mean bordering on non-existent, although some of them have more merit than others, some of these arguments, like the power stuff I'm going to come to in a second. And let's talk about this sentence here. Restriction breeds creativity. A very common line you see a lot during this conversation, and fundamentally at its base, I agree with the idea that restrictions do breed creativity. If you could play any card as colorless in Magic, the decks would be more homogenized and less creative, absolutely. But the point is there is a diminishing return on how much that restriction actually breeds any creativity. To give an example, how much creativity do you think is evoked or drawn out of you by not being able to play Enchanted Evening in a mono-white enchantment deck? I'd hazard the answer is very little. If I were to play a game with you where I was going to put you into a captured scenario and you have to break out of said capture, I tie your arms and your legs behind your back and I blindfold you and I gag you, and yes, some of you are probably getting horny at the idea of this. At that point, you are forced to try and be creative with the way you will escape this scenario, but at some point, that creativity just isn't enough. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to ask the question, we're playing a game, are you having fun yet? Outside of the kink, some people are going to say, obviously, no. It is not like an infinite value proposition of as we restrict things and put more restrictions on, that creativity blossoms. And ultimately, creativity isn't even the fucking end goal. If anything, the end goal is fun, and creativity should be a path towards that. Stopping someone from playing Beast of the Redeemed and then Mono Green 99 is not doing that for you. And as a side tangent, there is an aesthetics discussion here. Some people dislike the idea of seeing these hybrid cards, seeing a Godhead of Awe show up in a mono white deck. Have you noticed that this primarily concerns me for mono white decks? The thing is that aesthetics are very much an individual, very taste subjective thing, and in Commander you can do that with your own deck. If you believe aesthetically that the art of Jeff Lorberstein is bad and not what you want, is goofy and it's not what Magic should be, it's not serious enough, that's absolutely your choice to make, but I just don't agree with you, and that doesn't dictate what I should put into my deck. Now, of course, art choices are quite different to the mechanical game pieces we play with, but when we talk about aesthetics, we are really just talking about how the cards look and feel in a certain circumstance. You don't have to play with hybrid cards if the rules were changed. You don't have to put a Kitchen Finks in your mono white deck. Hell, most people won't, because the card kind of sucks outside of certain decks. But the point is, that's an aesthetic choice that you get to make that shouldn't dictate what I make. In a world where SpongeBob SquarePants might be your commander, aesthetics isn't really a valid argument. But let's get on to the stuff that I think has a bit more merit with power level. Something we have to ask ourselves when we are making an adjustment like this to an existing rule set or similar is, what does it bring to the game or certain decks? And there are certain cards that are way more powerful than everything else. I would say that the majority of hybrid cards are actually kind of doggers, like the vast majority. My cursory Scryfall search was correct. There's 480 hybrid cards in Magic right now, and I think not even 10% of those are really that playable. It might even be sub 5%. But of course, there are outliers that are incredibly powerful. I spoke earlier about how Phyrexian Mana broke the game. Well, Lurrus also broke the game. Of course, they've errated how his companion rule works now, so it doesn't quite break the game, or she doesn't quite break the game in the same way, but Lurrus is clearly a very powerful Magic card, as is Manamorphose. And yeah, I think honestly they are the two that stand out to me as being the most powerful things you can do. And even then, even then, how much damage can a singular Manamorphose do in some Storm deck? It is a good ritual / card draw spell for the setup to get towards a Storm style payoff, sure, but it's one card in the 99. I don't think Manamorphose is going to push the win percentages of Storm decks in mid to high tier games very far. I think this is probably the contender for seeing the most amount of play in CDH, which is probably a good consideration for how it's a good point for how strong the card is, but even then the vast majority of decks in CDH probably still don't want this, and thus I just don't think it's the problem that people want to suggest that it is. And Lurrus is a similar thing. I think actually even as a companion the restriction that it puts on your commander deck is so high that I think it's kind of bordering on fine, essentially. Like Lurrus in a 1v1 environment as a companion is a much bigger problem because of the extra card it gives you access to. Companions themselves as a Mechanica, one of the biggest mistakes Magic's ever made alongside Phyrexian Mana. But in a 4-player environment where having that extra card will draw the eye of the table and cause political alliances, and ultimately is balanced out by other players being present, I don't think it's that much of an issue. And Lurrus as part of the 99 is not dramatically bad either. A lot of people sort of understand that Lurrus was a problem at one point in other formats, and just assume it's always a problem at all times. And in reality, the context is very, very important, and those people didn't play those formats, or have even played with Lurrus in Commander, for example. But of course, this means that Lurrus can be played in Muldrotha now, or Manamorphose can be played in... What's an example of a deck that couldn't have played it before? What's a Grixis Storm Commander? Oh, I'm blanking really hard. I didn't write one down. Comment down below. And yes, they can. But again, I don't think that's a power level problem. Does it homogenize the game? Ooh, interesting one, right? I think Manamorphose probably shows up in most Storm builds across all parts of the format where you can play green or red. And we're more talking about red decks that don't have any green in them, right? Sure. That means that it will show up in a load of decks that it didn't before. I think Manamorphose is probably the fucking focus one for the one that is going to be the homogenizing force. But of one card of 480 that I think will be a bordering on problem like that, I do have to say in a world where everyone's including Smothering Tides and Ristic Tides in all their decks, I don't see it as that much of an issue. Like, I just struggle to care about Manamorphose showing up in those decks as an example of homogenizing forces when the format is being designed for and giving new super staples every year. That's a bigger concern to me. Sure, they're two separate concerns that can function independently, but one of these opens up so many possibilities of fun little shitty things to play, and the other one is a much more overbearing design problem for the game. So to answer the question of does this make multicolored too good, I don't really think so. I don't think it homogenized the game either. There are some like other powerful outliers, things like Melira combo, where with Melira and a sack outlet and a kitchen finks you can make infinite life, or with Melira and a sack outlet and murderous red caps you make infinite damage. And these things were playable in Commander already in certain decks, but now, for example, Melira can be in the command zone and kitchen finks can be in your deck. Another example that was brought up to me was Mikaeus the Unhallowed plus a sack outlet plus red caps, because red caps could never be in the deck before. Funny thing is, Mike and Trike and other similar combos already exist. We're just going from like a 6+6 mana combo plus a sack outlet to a 6+4 mana combo and a sack outlet. I just don't see any of this as a real problem. One of the interesting things about Commander is that it's self-balancing, both in the 4 players all interacting with one another and 3 of you can gang up and one person is obviously going for some stupid combo or getting ahead, but also in something like Gavin pointed out when discussing the bracket system was that certain cards don't need to be game changers or banned if they're already self-policed by things inside those brackets, or that rule 0 conversation you should be having. So if people at the table don't want 3-card infinite combos that come out of nowhere, like for example off of a collected company, even when the example of Melira and Kitchen Finks, then people can say that during the rule 0 conversation, and thus that combo isn't a problem at lower tables. Also, infinite life in Commander isn't the kind of win con that it is in Modern, when decks might well be Thassa's Oracling a win. Someone having infinite life doesn't fucking matter if you've got a combo condition that says I win on it. Again, it's context, right? So these combos don't really bother me. I don't think they are the damaging force to the game when other combos, millions of other combos when we add the combinations of thousands of cards in Magic together, millions of combos, for the third time to say it, already exist. A few more cropping up off of the more interesting hybrid mana color cards isn't a problem to me. And lastly, the one that we're going back to stuff that I don't really think is valid anymore. Those ones are more valid because there's a genuine conversation to be had there. But well, this is a genuine conversation, but I just don't know why it matters. It's about color pie breaks. The two obvious ones are Waves of Aggression and Debtor's Knell. We're back on the mono white stuff again because it's just my wheelhouse, right? Waves of Aggression says take an extra combat step, which is a thing that white doesn't tend to get. Although we just got an equipment in Final Fantasy that allows us to have access to that, and if anything, white is the color in the entire game that can access that more easily with ways to cheat equipment into hand and into play and to double the effects of them. So actually this is kind of a moot point. I'll come back to that more in a second, but let's explain Debtor's Knell. Debtor's Knell is a white-black hybrid card that at the beginning of your upkeep, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. This is a thing that white can't do without access to black, and thus is a color pie stretch or break. Both of these things are breaks, but they're breaks that are teetering on the edge of the popped bubble or damaged bubble, if you will. In the case of Waves of Aggression, we have extra combat steps, and white is arguably in the top 3, alongside red at top and maybe green and white interchangeably, combat step colors. And also, like I said already, they already have access to this stuff through some hoops that they have to jump through by accessing via equipment. Hell, there'll be decks where Waves of Aggression just isn't really worth playing, where tutoring up the equipment with a Stoneforge Mystic and putting it into play and then doubling its triggers with a Cloud might just be a better way of doing it anyway. And Debtor's Knell is a similar thing. It's just outside the wheelhouse of what white can do because it's touching into the borders of black. Almost like the color pie isn't separate segments, but almost gradients, which is what the hybrid mana quite literally tries to show us. These are two of the most egregious color pie breaks, and I just don't really understand why they matter that much when color pie breaks exist in Magic all the time. Damnation was originally a color shifted version of Wrath of God in a set where there were tons of color shifted stuff, including a Sarah Angel that became blue, I want to say. I should look that up before I started saying this sentence, but I think it becomes a Sphinx in the Planar Chaos set. That was intentional color pie breaks to elicit a alternate reality, alternate dimension feel and vibe, and we don't see people campaigning to have those removed from Commander. I know that's not quite what people are getting at when they say that Waves of Aggression is a thing that white shouldn't have access to, but it kind of is. It's a thing that the designers decided at one point in time they could, and then never went back to that well, or teethed on the edge of going back to that well with things like Debtor's Knell and Waves of Aggression. Sylvan Library is paying life to draw cards, which is absolutely not the fucking thing that green should be doing, and Top Deck Manipulation is also not the thing that green should be doing. This card is just not green. It's bollocks. And I could spend an entire video talking about color pie breaks, Dash Hopes being a black counterspell, or how Periphery Nodes, a very white-coded card in terms of damaging and blowing off creatures in a very parallel fashion, was originally fucking green with Drop of Honey for reasons that no one really understands. Mark Rosewater actually hates Hornet Sting, and he dislikes Hornet Queen, things that make bees that feel so inherently green, but in terms of game mechanics aren't green, because Flying Death Touchers don't fit with green's color pie mechanically, but they do flavorfully. My point is, color pie breaks happen, and I don't think we need to be concerned with them unless they're happening all the fucking time. And they're not. Hybrid Mana's not making more of them. It's allowing 2 corner cases to creep into Commander and do no harm. I hope this has helped you to perhaps reflect on some of the sort of like counter arguments you had for Hybrid Mana and how perhaps they don't make a huge amount of sense, or perhaps don't matter in the face of letting people play with a few more cards that fit within a design intention from the company themselves. In a Magic the Gathering world with more and more super staples and design for Commander cards coming out, and commanders that just have a activate ability of 5 fucking coloured pips strapped to like a red creature or whatever every fucking set, I do think that allowing Hybrid Mana is an absolute fucking small thing compared to some of the design issues we've got facing us through the explicit design for Commander. I do agree that there's an argument that perhaps adding on extra weight with that small thing is not what we want to do when facing down this future. But I just think allowing people to play red caps in a mono red goblin deck is not going to damage the format. It'll only make the format better. I've been Vince, also on PleasantKenobi on the internet. I hope that wasn't too reductionist. I hope that was at least in-depth enough, if anything. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, and I'll see you all soon. Ta-ta for now.